cultural wide, and that has become a staggering problem if you're part of the minority community. Today we are facing a crisis of singlehood. That is, a generation of people who are unmarried. Now, do not misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with being unmarried. Nor does God expect or demand that everyone gets married. But the crisis that I'm speaking about is not a crisis of preference or a crisis of calling. It is not because people prefer to be single or feel called to be single. It is because we have a generation of people with no one to marry. There is an ominous absence, not only among Christians, although the problem is worse among Christians because the criteria is tighter among Christians, but it's a cultural problem. With divorce, we have a generation of single parents who are raising children alone. With the secularization of culture, the view of marriage is no longer held in its historical esteem. Now, this problem is most felt among women. Churches nationwide are gearing up their singles ministry, recognizing the fact that it will have to have a dynamic ministry to the growing population of single people. How many singles do we have here today? Well, as you can see, a large number, as is the case in most churches. If you're African American and single, there are 5 women for every available 1 man, which is good for the men, but can create trauma for the woman, although it is also possible in this secularized age to be a man and have this issue confused. The natural processes of mating, the natural processes of connecting have become damaged. And so that which would be normal, boy meets girl, girl falls in love with boy, vice versa, they get married, has been interrupted by sin, circumstances, and secularism. So for many single people, what they don't need is a mate, what they need is a miracle. They literally need the divine intervention of God to address the problem, because the natural processes do not allow for it. And that problem will become worse before it becomes better. Might I suggest to you today that if you desire to be married and you do not feel that your singlehood is related to calling or preference, that because the natural processes have been interrupted by sin, secularism, and circumstances, that what you need is fasting and prayer. Now, some of you may believe I'm getting out of hand with this subject. But as you will discover next week, some of you married folk need fasting and prayer. All right? As I meditated on this subject, I asked the Lord to give me something that would encourage those who are single especially, and even those who are married, who have single people in their families or that they are related to. And as God always does, he always has a passage. In Genesis 24, we read this verse. We read in verse 31, and he said, "Come in, blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside, since I have prepared the house and a place for the camels?" So the man entered the house. Laban unloaded the camels. He gave straw and feed to the camels and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. But when food was set before him to eat, he said, I will not eat until I have told my business. I will not satisfy my body until I have seen my prayer answered. He makes a statement of denying the flesh food in order to get from God a mate, because he needed a miracle. Now, we don't have time to go through all the idiosyncrasies of the story, but let me give you a few introductory facts. Abraham is concerned that his son is not married yet. Isaac is 40 years old and either has not found any wife or most certainly has not found the right wife. So if you are 40 years old today and you are still single, don't feel that bad. Isaac is 40 years old, and Mrs. Wright, as far as he can see, has not yet come along. And like any good mother and father who sees their 40-year-old who thinks they ought to be married by now, not married, Abraham is ticked. This leads to a process that I offer you, those who are single in particular, because the Word of God, as we have seen in this series, teaches that when you need a breakthrough, when the normal processes do not work and you need a miracle, fasting and prayer is the road to take. I want to say 4 things today, and of course, because of our special ceremony, we will go a little bit over, but I don't think I'm going to lose too many singles as I go through this. If you are going to fast for a mate, it will involve 4 things that need to come alongside of your fasting as you wait for your miracle. First of all, fasting involves commitment to God. Abraham, at the beginning of chapter 24, calls his servant who he's going to send out to look for a wife for his son. He says at the end of verse 2, please place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven, the God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from among the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I live. You shall go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac. He says, I want you to swear by God. Abraham recognized that finding a wife and finding the right wife was going to take God. And so he says, I want you to swear by your commitment to God. Now, this commitment to God was covenantal. God had made a promise to Abraham, the Abrahamic covenant, that he was going to make of Abraham a great seed. Well, the question is, how can I have a great seed if my son doesn't even have a wife? So his concern was God's person, swear by God, and God's program. Many people get married for a lot of reasons, but often unconnected to the kingdom of God. He says, I want a wife to fulfill the covenantal promise of God. I want a wife so that I can have, if I would put it in everyday language today, a Christian home. I want a mate so I can establish a model of the kingdom of God on the street where I live. He connected the miracle to the program of God. It wasn't just so he could have legalized sex. It wasn't just so that he could have somebody be with him and not be lonely at night. Nothing wrong with any of those reasons, but there was something bigger on the table, and that was God and his program. If you want to get God as you fast and pray, tell God what he's going to get out of the mate he brings you. Tell God how this supernatural provision of a person will do something for his person and his kingdom because he was committed to God. He had to swear by God, and to take an oath was a serious thing. It was a thing of commitment. Not only that, but he said, do not take a wife from the Canaanites. Now that narrows the field a little bit. Not only are you going to tell me don't take her from the Canaanites, you're going to say narrow them to my people and people who are connected to my relatives. He narrows the field. When you're single, why narrow the field? Because you want God involved in this. And if you want God involved in this, you must meet his criteria. Now, what did it mean to not marry the Canaanites? It meant not to be unequally yoked with sinners. 2 Corinthians chapter 6 says it plainly, verses 14 to 16. Be not unequally yoked together with non-believers, for what fellowship hath light with darkness? If you want a miracle from God in locating a mate, you get on your knees during your fast and you say, God, I am committed to you, and I'm so committed to wanting you involved in this process that I want you to know I will not enter into an intimate relationship with a non-Christian. That's what it means saying. And what you do when you say that is narrow the field. Many of you single people, because you're frustrated and you're lonely, have been tempted to interface intimately with a non-Christian, knowing that that is against the standard of God. And the reason you did it wasn't because you were just trying to disobey God, but they seemed like the only folks available. They were the only ones rapping to you. They were the only ones offering to take you on a date. So the temptation is to lower your standard in order to meet your need. But I want to tell you, when you do it God's way, you up your standard in order to meet your need. He says, don't compromise with the Canaanites. Why? Because they have a different God. They have a different standard, and there will be a clash. It's like the man who met the lady, saw this pretty lady at the airport. He said, where are you going? She said, to Florida. He said, well, I'm going to Canada. Why don't we get on the same plane? It was an impossible request. You know why? They were going in two different directions. You can't fly together unless you go in the same place. And a non-Christian is on his way down. If you know Jesus Christ, you're on your way up. You can't fly together. And yes, that narrows the field when you can't marry the Canaanites. However, it expands the field if God is doing the picking. It's like taking a disk from Macintosh and putting it in an IBM PC. It's not geared to work there because the systems are incompatible. The non-Christian is natural. The Christian is spiritual. And when you try to put those two disks in the one machine called marriage, it won't read it. They are incompatible systems. And yes, that narrows the field. I'm going to let you know that that narrows the field real small, but it gets God's attention. And so the first principle is there was raw commitment to God. Dogged commitment to God. A commitment that did not understand how God was going to do it, when God was going to do it, but he said, I'm going to trust God to do it for the sake of his covenant, even though my boy is 40 years old and single. Secondly, fasting involves not only commitment to God, but when you fast for a mate, it involves confidence in God. Look at verse 7. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and who swore to me, saying, to your descendants I will give this land. He will send his angels before you, and you will take a wife for my sons from there. You know what he says? He says, if you follow God, he's going to lead you to the lady. I don't know who she is. I don't know the exact location. All I know is that the Lord will lead you. Guess what he assures him of? He assures him of divine guidance. He assures him to march out looking for a mate with the conviction that God will supply. And I want you single people to leave this service this morning with the confidence that if you make the commitment and you walk in faith, God has somebody for you. I don't know where he is. I don't know where she is. I don't know how you're going to meet him. But I do know this. If you walk with commitment and if you walk with confidence that my God is able to supply, then you walk with your head up, not your head down. And so, how do we know the servant had faith? Because he didn't stay home. His faith was exercised. That is, he began the process of looking for the leading of God. There's nothing wrong with looking for the leading of God. The Bible says, he that finds a wife finds a good thing. You cannot find stuff you're not looking for. But if you're committed, you're not looking in the clubs because you can't hang out with the Canaanites. You are looking, and by looking I mean you are just letting God lead you. You're just making your way. You're just living your Christian life, and you are open to God's movement in your life. I want you to notice something. How do we know he had confidence that God was going to lead him? Because his life was full of prayer. And remember, fasting always involves prayer. His life was full of communication with God. Look at verse 12. And he said, "O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show loving kindness to my master." Look at verse 27. And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master. As for me, the Lord has guided me in the way of the house of my master's brother." He prayed specifically. And let me show you how specific he prayed. Now watch this now. Verse 13. "I am standing by a spring, and the daughters of men of the city are coming to draw out water. Now may it be that the girl to whom I say, 'Please let down your jar so that I may drink,' and who answers, 'Drink, and I will water your camels also,' may also be the one whom thou hast appointed for thy servant Isaac." He didn't say, "Lord, bless me with a woman somewhere around here. Somewhere in the world, there's a wife for my master's son." He said, "No. May it be that when I go to the well and the ladies show up to get their daily water, and I say to the ladies who show up, 'Give me a drink,' may the woman who you chose for me not only offer to give me a drink, may she offer also to take care of my camels." In other words, he got real specific. He didn't want to miss this thing. He didn't just want to look out and because they treat me nice, that might be the one. He got down to, "Lord, here is the one I want." Have you made your list yet? Have you sat down and said, "Now, Lord, here's what I want. Here's what I want about this man. Here's the kind of character I want." Now, get into that in a moment. This is what I am looking for. Don't be afraid to get specific. Now, he could have argued, "I can't deal with the Canaanites. Don't know where I'm going. I ought to stay general." Because I'm dealing with God, I'm going to get real specific. And I'm going to lay down exactly what I want. My wife told me she was praying for me before she knew me. Told me she told God exactly what she wanted. And then I came along. Don't be afraid to be specific with God. He says, "I want this woman to do this thing, because I know that this will not generally be done." It was an act of faith. Faith is not some amorphous feeling. Faith writes it down on a piece of paper and says, this is what I want. Now, God always is sovereign. He has the right to give you something different, something better, but you still take to him what you want. These general prayers, Lord, bless me today, that's a nothing prayer. When he thanks the Lord for blessing him in verse 27, he thanks for blessing him for his specific guidance in a specific situation that led him to a specific person. See, this thing of fasting and prayer isn't for folks who want general stuff. It's for folks who want God to break through. So that there's no question, only God did that. God's leading, when you're willing to walk by faith, is like a surfer catching a wave. You know, they paddle out, then they get on the surfboard with the wave coming in, then they balance themselves. All they do is position themselves. If they position themselves right, the wave takes over. And the wave moves them to the shoreline. When you are committed to God, and when you step out on faith, you're positioning yourself so that the wave of God's will can carry you to where he wants you to go. You see, you know, we say the statement, there are plenty of fish in the sea. Yeah, I don't want to fool with all them fish. I don't need you. There's plenty of fish in the sea. Yeah, that's why you don't like the one you just caught right now. There's plenty of fish in the sea. I want my fish. But the problem is, there's plenty of fish in the sea, but I don't know the one that's going to work for me. I don't know the one that's going to be compatible for me, because you know how it is. They can look at compatible up front when you're dating. Single, talk to some of them marrieds. They tell you they can look compatible up front when you're dating. But then you marry them, and you think you think you got a trout, and you wind up with a swordfish. And in fasting and prayer, trust him for it. Now, he couldn't stay home. He had to go out. He had to move, but it was in the movement. Thirdly, fasting for a mate involves character before the Lord. Not only commitment to the Lord, confidence in the Lord, but character before the Lord. What does he ask her to do? He says, I'm going to ask her for water. And the one who says, I'll also feed the camels, I'll know something about her. Why did he ask for that? Well, look at the story. It came about before he was finished speaking. Oh, I like that. Wouldn't you like God to answer your prayer for a mate before you finish speaking? How about before I even finish speaking? And behold, Rebecca, according to verse 15, Rebecca was born of Bethuel, came up, and the girl was very beautiful. No man had relationships with her. She went down to the spring and filled a jar, came up. The servants ran to meet her. Please let me drink a little water from your jar. She said, drink, my Lord. When she had finished giving him drink, she said, I will draw also from your camels until they had finished drinking. Now, I want to show you 4 things from this passage about this woman's character. Because if you want to find the right person, you need to be the right person. Did you hear that? You can't be a compromising, half-stepping Christian talking about God, give me a spiritual giant. If you want to find the right person, you must be becoming the right person. Number 1, we discover she was a virgin. So she was committed to moral purity. She was not compromising sexually in order to hook up with the right one. She was not sleeping around hoping that one of the folks she slept with would ask her to marry him. She was committed to moral purity. She was beautiful, though. She wasn't like nobody was looking for her. She wasn't the kind of lady where nobody would be interested in her. That's why the text lets us know she was beautiful. Purity has a way of showing itself forth. You know how they have these detergent commercials, and they show you how one detergent cleans another detergent? They do the washing, then they put out the different laundry, and they can always show you the one that was washed by the particular detergent that they're advertising because it's real clean. It's real clean. My wife told me, I'd only known my wife 2 weeks when I told her I was going to marry her. It's a 2-week relationship. At the end of 2 weeks, I said, you're going to be my wife, okay? I'll explain that in a moment, okay? But let me tell you one of the major things when I knew I was going to marry her. After 1 week, we're getting to know each other. She was telling me about her commitments. And one of those commitments was to keep herself a virgin until she married. And that sparkled to me. There was a commitment of purity. You cannot ask God to lead you to a mate if you're swimming in the mud. You cannot ask God to lead you to a mate if you have no standards. If you're only good to be picked up, then let Satan find somebody to pick you up. But if you are a woman of dignity, of class, and of character, then you're not a piece of cloth to be used. You are a daughter of the king to be honored. What Satan has done, though, is he's taken the one tree God says you can have and caused you to miss the 100 trees you can have. That's what he did with Eve. He's so focused on the one thing you can't do that she missed all the other stuff she could have been enjoying that she could do. Don't let Satan and the sex-crazed culture that we're in get you so focused on the one thing God says don't do that you don't get to enjoy all the privileges and all the freedoms and all the experiences of what you can do under God. So she was pure in character. Secondly of all, she offered to feed the camels as well as to feed him. There are two things there, actually. Number two is she was kind. She was kind. She was a sharing person. She was not selfish. This is my water. You get yours. Anybody married to a woman like that? Cooking dinner and asking you what you're going to eat. He wanted the kind of woman who was going to be kind, sharing, unselfish. That's why he asked her. Who would offer the drink? But not only was she kind, she was also, thirdly, industrious. Camels can drink 25 gallons of water a shot. There are 10 camels. So that's a whole lot of work. This isn't a soap opera woman. This isn't a as the world turns and the food burns kind of lady. This is a woman who is industrious. He knows that this woman who offers to feed, did not beg to feed the camels or pleaded with to feed the camels or, oh, why don't you please clean up the house? Why don't you please give your family something to eat? Oh, please, 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 please. Can I have some clean clothes? I'm begging you, please. This woman was industrious, or to put it another way, she was productive. Now, I know I got some women livers here. Okay. Please go make some money. Let me include all the categories here. I know you don't just wash and iron, but my point is she was industrious. So don't write me no letters. I don't want no faxes, all right? Okay. She was industrious. She's a hard worker. She wasn't somebody who's just going to stay in bed and lay in bed all day, get the kids to school, lay in bed till 3 o'clock. When the kids come home, slap a sandwich together. She was productive. So his requests aren't at random. They're designed to, so ladies, if you're dating somebody, put some things down that you want God to do to validate this thing. Vice versa, men. And he says in verse 23, please tell me, is there room for us to lodge in your father's house? She says in verse 25, we have plenty of both straw and feed and room to lodge in. She was hospitable. 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 You could feel comfortable around her. She welcomed you, not repelled you. There's a place for you. He said, this is a woman of character. This is a woman of dignity. This is a woman of kindness. Finally, fasting for a mate involves confirmation by God. Fasting for a mate involves confirmation by God. There's so much here. He goes to the place, he tells them, I'm not going to eat till this matter is settled. And then he outlines in verse 34 and following the story that led him to her house. That God was in the process of working this out. And when they hear the story, because they too believed in the same God, Laban and Bethuel, verse 50, answered and said, this matter comes from the Lord. Behold, Rebekah, verse 51, is before you. Take her and go. In other words, when the Lord is in it, somebody else is going to see it. If you're the only person that sees she's the right one, something's wrong. You always want other people who love the Lord to confirm it, especially other people who are part of the family who love the Lord. Now, I'm talking about people who don't love the Lord, they don't have the same criteria. But if they love the Lord, look for confirmation by other people who love the Lord as a way of confirming to you that this is right. Which is why in the Bible, the father, a godly father, always was involved in the marriage and the giving away of his daughter. It was a way of confirming it. So some godly person to confirm it. It was confirmed by the families. But he had also said it was confirmed by the circumstances, you know, the camels and all of that, and how he wound up meeting her at the well. Now, let me tell you something here. There is no word from God in this story, no direct word from God. There are no prophecies in this story. There are no unusual circumstances in this story. You know what this is? The quiet leading of God. Sometimes God may do something graphic, but this just came because he met her at a well, and he happened to ask a question about a drink, and she happened to ask it and answer it right. And in other words, it was just doing the movement of the walking that they hooked up. It was in the movement of the living that they hooked up. In other words, it wasn't something special. Some of you remember Kendra. Let me tell you Kendra's story, a member of our church 10 years ago. We were having church in the Family Life Center. She was sitting in her seat where she always sat every Sunday morning. A gentleman came in, and the church was packed that Sunday, and he came in to sit in the back because that was the only seats that were left. He came in with 5 or 6 other people. When he came in with 5 or 6 other people, they filled in the last row of the sanctuary, which only had 4 seats. So he had to be seated elsewhere. The ushers went looking for a seat. Kendra always came to church with her friend, but her friend called her that morning to tell her she was sick. So Kendra did not have anyone sitting next to her who she normally had sitting next to her. 1 seat was open. The ushers led this gentleman down to the 1 open seat in the sanctuary next to Kendra. On that Sunday morning, I asked everybody to turn to their neighbor and pray. She could have turned left, but she turned right. They held each other's hands with one mind thinking about God. The other mind was thinking about good, googa, mugga, mugga, mugga. They introduced themselves to one another, and it was over. They felt a little spark there, but it was over. He was going his way, and he was from out of town. He was from Washington, D.C., just down here on a business trip, coming to church that particular Sunday, happened to not have enough seats in the back row, so he wound up being put next to her, but service was over. He was leaving the next day to go back to Washington, and that was that. Except when he left church, he and his 6 people went out to eat. And wouldn't you know it, of all the restaurants in Dallas, they chose by luck the very same restaurant that Kendra was eating with some of the members of the church that they decided at the last minute to go to at the end of service. He told me when he saw her, after experiencing what had happened in the church, he couldn't stand it any longer. On his way out, he said, look, I know this is presumptuous. You just met me. Would you mind if I got your number? She said, no, and I'd like to have yours too. A couple of months later, they were married. Why? Because when God is in it, it doesn't take long. These people spending years trying to find out somebody's the right one. Years. I knew in 3 days that I was going to marry my wife. 3 days. I had never seen her before in my life. After the 3rd day. First day, she cooked for me. So that was, we going in the right direction. Second day, she ministered with me. And the third day, she let me into some of her orientations of life. And I just happened to be invited to her house for dinner. She didn't know me from anybody, but I knew after the 3rd day, this would be my wife. And told her after 2 weeks. Because when God is in it, you don't need 5 years to get it all right. Now watch this. The servant says, I would like permission to take her back. And they said, take her and go. Verse 24. Her brother and her mother said, let the girl, verse 55, stay with us a few days. Say 10, then she can go. But he said, do not delay me since the Lord is in this. The Lord has prospered it. This is God at work. Don't delay it. Verse 57, we shall consult the girl and ask her wishes. You see, because you never get so involved in the marriage of somebody you love that you skip what they want. And as parents, you can do that. As friends, you can do that. So what do you want to do? And they called Rebekah and said, will you go with this man? And she says, I will go. Now, what's the problem in this story? Help me, somebody. She has not met the man. She doesn't know who Isaac is. But because she knows God, and because she's close to God, and because she knew God was in it, she said, I will go. Never met the man. But she does get to meet him in verse 63. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. Now, what does this tell us about Isaac? He's spending time with God. If he's meditating in the evening, he's spending time with God. He's 40 years old, not married yet, but he's spending time with God. In the field toward evening, lifted up his eyes, and behold, camels were coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismantled from her camel. Ooh. Riding the camel. Isaac looked up and saw her and said, oh, Lord. Doesn't know who she is. She sees Isaac. Said, I got to get off this beast. When she sees him, and she said to the servant, who is this man walking in the field to meet us? Because she doesn't know that's the man she's come to marry. And the servant said, he is my master. Then she took her veil and covered herself. A statement of humility and honor. And the servant told Isaac all the things that God had done. Then Isaac brought her into his mother's Sarah's tent and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Ooh, watch it. How you going to love her? You don't know her. You just met her. Okay, let me ask you a question now. Here it is. Watch this now. I get asked this all the time. Let me give it to you. Is there such a thing as love at first sight? Let me give you something better. There is such a thing as love before first sight. That's a new one. I'm just talking about love at first sight. I'm talking about love before first sight, because God has gotten so involved in it that all the preparation is made so that when first sight occurs, what God has prepared automatically jumps out. She jumps off her camel. How many of you ladies just saw somebody walking down the street, come on, I'm in love? It's love before first sight. Ruth committed herself to the Lord and Naomi, and God gave her supernaturally Boaz. Let me tell you another true story, then we'll wind this down to a conclusion. Look, it was a bum. We call him a bum, hitchhiking in Arkansas. There were some men who drove by the guy and said, well, we'll pick him up. He said, where you go? Well, he says, I'm just going as far as you're going. Where you going? We're going to Texas. We're going to Promise Keepers in Dallas, the one I spoke at. So they picked the bum up and drove him to Texas because he was just trying to find a new place to live. On the way, he told him his story, how he had become a Christian early in life, how he walked away from the Lord, and when he walked away from the Lord, he lost his family, he lost his children, hadn't seen his family in 10 years. He rededicated his life to Christ through the influence of the Promise Keeper guys and went to the Promise Keeper event. He was on fire, and they asked him, well, what do you want to do now? He says, well, I have some relatives in Alabama, and I just want to know if there's a way I can go to Alabama. They said, well, there are probably some guys here who are going to Alabama. He said, because I've committed my life back to the Lord. I want to find these relatives and try to get my life back on track. He had committed life to the Lord, and they asked around, is anybody going to Alabama? And that's the way the Promise Keepers do sometimes. And there's a guy that says, I'm going to Alabama. Would you have room for somebody else? He said, yeah, I drove the Promise Keepers by myself. I will be glad to take the man back. So the man, true story, got in the car with this younger man, and they are driving to Alabama, one committing his life to the Lord and one who's already committed to the Lord, and they're just driving along. As they drive along, the bum begins to tell his story. The young man says, oh, that's interesting. I'm from Arkansas, too. They begin to exchange information, and halfway between Dallas and Alabama, he has discovered his own son is driving him home. That is the supernatural, sovereign moving of God. I know you're tired. I know it's hard. There's a social problem going on. But you don't need to just flit all over the place. Just raise your spiritual antenna so you can pick up the God network and get in on what he's doing. Yeah, but you say, I'm in a hurry. I'm getting older. The clock is ticking. That's like the man who told the businessman that he was in a hurry. He was rushing. The man said, where are you going? He says, I'm rushing to catch my plane. The man looked at him and said, don't rush. Plane's not going anywhere. I'm the pilot. As long as God's the pilot, the plane's not going anywhere. Don't rush. If you're looking for a mate and you don't feel called to singlehood, nor is it your preference, because of sin and society and secularism, fast and pray till your change comes.
This concludes this presentation by author and speaker Dr. Tony Evans of the Urban Alternative. For information on tapes, books, booklets, and videos available by Dr. Evans, please write the Urban Alternative, Box 4000, Dallas, Texas 75208, or phone 1-800-800-3222. A free catalog will be provided without cost or obligation. Thank you for listening.